This video is going to be a little different than the other videos. If you notice that I'm not putting the same cover page on it, this is the review. One of the things that I realize over the last couple weeks is how special the I remember how special the reviews were when we were going through the Bible in 90 days. And one of the problems is we have a set of videos that are copywritten, and I can't just share those videos with you. They're owned by Zondervan, and they take they value their intellectual property, and I can't just share those with you. I don't have a way to do it. I mean, other than just playing them on a TV in the corner and just kind of showing you to them, but that would be totally wrong. And but those videos are available through the Scripture Awakening website, and I encourage you to get them and look through them as we go through these things. But I thought that I could do this without that, and we can, but I was going to do it. I was going to do it in the form of live videos on Thursdays, like I promised, but I need your forgiveness. I failed to do that. I failed to do that, and it really hit me hard last night about how I promised to do something and I didn't do it, and now I have to come to you for forgiveness. But I am also in the heart of redemption that I want to conduct some review of what we've done. I'm not going to be able to do it like John Walton is able to do it in those videos. Man, he's a biblical scholar, and he's able to he knows the Scripture, and I know the Scripture pretty well, and I am able to do some kind of review, but it's not the same kind of justice that he did in those videos. So if you do lead a B90 Bible in 90 days thing in the future, and I encourage you to, and I would help you do it in any way that I can. You can use these videos that I've made. They're all going public on my YouTube page, and I will leave them there. And hopefully next year, if I do this again the same way, I'll be able to do it in a better quality, in a better way, and just continue to grow. And as we look at the scriptures that we've read so far, I've got these, the books that we've read: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Well, we haven't got through Chronicles all the way yet, but Chronicles is kind of what put this back in my heart to get back to it. And I was kind of just going, I'm like, man, I'm already reading the Bible and recording it, and posting it every day. Isn't that enough? And no, it's not enough. We have to have some review, and we have to have some meaning for what we're doing. And I just remembered, I was thinking last night as I was going to sleep, uploading today's video, I just had it in my heart to do this review. So forgive me for not doing this earlier, and just bear with me as I'm learning as we go. And I hope you're learning too. I hope you haven't been dismayed by that. And this is overwhelming. I realize that. The Bible starts with the phrase, in Genesis 1, verse 1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Now, something that one of my earlier pastors, if you can believe those 7 words in the beginning of the Bible, the rest of it should be easy. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that's how Genesis begins. That's how the Bible begins. John, in his gospel, kind of starts it the same way. What I want to do is just fly through what we've read so far. So Genesis, aside from chapter 1 through 11, which I kind of told you is prehistoric. It's the prehistoric account of before the flood. I truly believe that God spoke everything into existence. I think in verses 1, I like John Walton's teaching, in verses 1, in chapter 1, he's creating time. And that's why it seems confusing to us in the language. In verses 1, he says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and now the earth was void." So he says, "Let there be light." And then later he doesn't even create light until like the third day. He doesn't create the sun and the moon. And we would look at that and say, well, light, period. He created light, and then he separated light from darkness. How can you have light without, our logical minds take it to there. How can you have light without darkness and or the sun and the moon and these things? We know now that the moon reflects the light from the sun, the greater light and the lesser light. God wrote everything into existence with his voice. He spoke all these things into existence. He spoke that into existence, but he made humans with his hands. And that's what we see in the creation account. We see God being intimate with his creation. He has made a man with his hands, and it was good. He made him perfectly. And then he breathed into his nostrils, and he created life in him. I find it fascinating. That's something that I always go back to when I think about creation. I think about God speaking all these things into existence. The voice of Jesus even speaking all of these things into existence. But he got his hands dirty when he made us. He put his hands in the dirt, in the earth that he had made with his voice, and he created this human being in the image of himself, in the image. And that doesn't mean that God has arms and legs and a mind, and it means that we are his ambassadors on earth. We are his creation that is to be his image on earth. And I love that. I love that God created us for a purpose. And throughout the rest of this book, it just adds to that, and then going from Genesis 3, where they decided that the humans decided that they would not accept God as their thing, and that's what they said, and that's what the whole thing about eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Think about that. They ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil so that they could have it for themselves. And that's what the serpent, the Satan figure there in the beginning, he said, surely you won't die. And then they ate it, and they surely didn't die. Not right away anyway, but we don't know Adam and Eve today. They didn't live forever like they were supposed to. They died. And every person since then has died. Every person that ever lived, with the exception of Enoch, who walked with God, and later Elijah, we read, that went away on a fiery chariot. But they're not here anymore. They're not with us on earth anymore. So in a sense, they died. I don't know how that happens. That's cosmic stuff that we get to ask about when we get to heaven. But other than that, every person in the world that ever lived has died. So, even the first promise that God made comes true for everyone. So as we move on, after 11, we see the Tower of Babel. We see them building their own way to God, and so that the gods can come down on and be with humans again, and all of this. And we see God separating the nations out. And there are 70 nations, and they're all divided across the earth, and that's the distribution of the nations. But God takes one nation. He finds this man named Abraham, and he makes a nation for himself out of the Chaldeans, out of Ur and the Chaldeans. And Abram goes and surveys the land that will one day be his inheritance, and God says, I will make a people out of you. And so that's the rest of the story of Genesis is Abraham wandering in there and saving Lot and destroying the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he rescued Lot. He rescued Lot before then and met Melchizedek and went through. Man, this story is so full of life and everything. And then then we have his sons. We have Ishmael and Isaac. and Isaac was his son by Sarai, his wife, and then Ishmael was his son by his concubine, or by his slave, which ended up being his concubine, and that's like a girlfriend. But and then we see God blessing both of those. So we see nations coming out of Ishmael, and we see nations coming out of Isaac, and that's kind of the rest of the story for Abraham. And then so this torch gets passed from Abraham to Isaac, and then from Isaac has 12 sons, and they end up being the 12 tribes of Israel. And especially since we've gotten to First Chronicles, I think that after BC, or after not BC, but after Babylon, every book is written as if it might be the only book that people read, or the scroll or whatever. So it needed to be all encompassing, and that's what I love about John's gospel. One of my first impressions of the Gospel of John is that John wrote this as if it was the only book that someone would need, and it urges you to believe and supports your belief that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and is the high priest and the king that Israel always needed, and that's the truth of it. So I want to kind of make a timeline as we go. Let's say if we start at Genesis, we're going to start pretty high because the fall had not happened yet. We start out pretty high, and it only goes for so long. Who knows how long? But then we have a fall. This is Genesis 3. Okay, and things get really bad. And then they get worse, and then we have a flood. And then we have Noah floating on top of the flood, and all the world goes down. Okay, so then things start getting better because you have Abraham. And then things get even better because you have Isaac. And then you have Jacob, who becomes Israel. And there wasn't anything, man, the first time going through the Genesis account, I just realized what kind of a person Jacob was. He was a swindler, man. He swindled his father-in-law out of a bunch of sheep and stuff, and I mean by using that stick in the water and all kinds of stuff. So you have Jacob. He's look, if you look at the fall, if you look at where Adam was before the fall, and then you see the fall, he's still way down here, okay? And then you have Egyptian slavery, okay? He has his 12 sons, and things don't get better. They get worse. They go into slavery. So they don't go back down to the flood stage, but they get pretty close. So you have 400 years of slavery. And then you have Exodus, all right? Exodus is the story of Moses. Moses is incredible. Moses is, but he didn't start out strong. He didn't start out strong like we see David and Solomon doing. We see Moses starting out with a whole bunch of excuses. My tongue doesn't work. I'm not quick. And God says, well, you have your brother Aaron. We'll get him to speak for you. And I'm just kind of paraphrasing some of this, but he goes, all right. Well, so they start doing it, and then we have the Red Sea parting. I'm going to draw that kind of like that. The Red Sea. We have God working through these people, and they go through into the wilderness. And in the wilderness, man, they went to Mount Sinai, right? Moses had all these people, and numbers say that there was 2 million of them across the sea going through. Man, there was a lot of people. This is a lot of people, and God has chosen all these people. But when they get to the bottom of the mountain, God says, call these people up to me, or have these people approach the mountain. And they come up to the mountain, and they are afraid. They don't want to go up the mountain with Moses. They told Moses that you go up the mountain, and we'll watch. So Moses goes up to the mountain, and then God says, don't let them come up to the mountain. Don't let them come up to the mountain because they're afraid of me, and if they do, you need to kill them. So they don't. So Moses and Joshua go up. Now, what is this? What does this drawing of a mountain look like to you? Can y'all see this? I don't know if you can see it, but I kind of drew a volcano here. That's what it looks like. You see Mount Sinai, and it looks like with the flame and the smoke on top of it, it looks like a volcano. Okay, now it looks like Moses goes up into this volcano for 40 days, and they come back down, and they had built a golden calf to worship as the god that brought them out of Egypt. And man, it's just terrible. So Moses comes down and breaks the tablets and goes back up for another 40 days and makes another one. God had chosen these people, but he ended up with two people, Aaron and Moses and Joshua. Joshua was part of this. Joshua was able to come up the mountain a little ways. And then Moses and him went back down, and Joshua said, "It sounds like war in the camp." And he said, "No, that's not war. That sounds like a party." More or less. And so they really rejected God. They rejected God, and they started doing their own things. And so we have this 40 years in the wilderness. And then we have the conquest. Okay? So I'm just kind of going through some of this. But we have... During this time, God gives the law to Moses. He gives him the rules for Leviticus. And when at the bottom of this mountain, there was so much that happened. Okay, there was God giving him the law. Moses went back up, and he got the instructions for the tabernacle and how to do this, and the instructions for the Leviticus. Well, Leviticus is the account of that. Numbers is the account of the wandering in the wilderness. It's the apostasy that they went through. You remember the story about them getting plagues for not wanting this manna. You know, they wanted meat. And they said, "We want meat." And so he sent enough meat he sent enough quail that they were all knee deep in quail, and that was cool, but when the quail died and rotted, they all got sick, and there was tens of thousands of them died to that plague. And so this is the account of Numbers, where they're wandering in the wilderness. So then a lot of them died of the plague, and a lot of them died of different things. And then they started fussing again, and even Miriam and Aaron, and Miriam became leprous, and she eventually dies in the book of Numbers, and Aaron dies there too. Aaron dies, Miriam dies, and Moses dies at the end of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is Moses' last words. Levites is the instructions to the priestly kingdom. Numbers is the wilderness wandering. Remember the serpents. Remember the serpents that came to bite them when they were fussing one time, and then they became so he instructed them to make the brass serpent, and if they got bit by the snake, all they had to do was look at it. He didn't ever want them to bow down and worship it, and that comes into the story later in First Kings, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. And then to get into Deuteronomy a little bit, Deuteronomy, you can imagine Moses knowing God as well as he did, and knowing that his people would fall away from the law, the good law that God had given them, being a sanctified people. The beginning at the bottom of the mountain is a big time clue that the people of Israel want the blessings from God, but they don't want the responsibility of being a holy people. So they go on and do that. And then Deuteronomy, we have Moses' last words. That's what I have written here. These books are called the Pentateuch. These are, when you see the law of the prophets, the books of Moses, or these different kinds of terms that they use for the first 5 books of the Bible, we have the Pentateuch. Even the Samaritans, they're the Sumerians later, they still accept this, but they don't accept the rest of the history of Judah. So they are part of part of this history, but they reject this. And you know what? I mean, if you want to be honest with it, God rejects the truth of this, what they went through, because they, we learned in, I think it was Second Kings, yeah, at the end, or maybe it was Chronicles. No, it was Second Kings. It was near the end when Josiah was the king. That they had never, remember in Exodus, he told them about the Passover and what they should do when they entered the new land was to celebrate Passover, and they had never done that. They didn't do that when they entered the land under Joshua. They definitely didn't do it during the time of Judges. Ruth didn't know anything about it. First and Second Samuel, things were getting reformed, but they weren't where they should be yet. First and Second Kings, that was the real reform, but they even still, until the time of Josiah, they never celebrated the Passover. I thought that was fascinating. That hit me this time. I don't know if the first time I read through it I just glossed over that, but man, it really hit me that they had never celebrated Passover. Where they were supposed to, what they did in Exodus when the last plague hit the Pharaoh. They were supposed to paint the thing over there. That was the only time they really ever did it. That's incredible, fascinating. And it didn't happen until the end of Second Kings. David didn't do it. Samuel didn't, or Samuel didn't do it either, but Solomon didn't do it. Anyway, let's keep moving on. Joshua, I wrote down right here, be strong and courageous. And that's kind of the line from Joshua. Remember to be strong and be courageous, because the Lord fights for you. And we see that through the conquest of Canaan. We see it in the beginning where they didn't even have to fight and all the walls fell down. Now, when the walls fell, they had to go in and do something, and they were so full of pride from the way they were able to fight that they just went to Ai without even consulting God, without asking him for the strategy or anything like that. They just sent a couple thousand men, so we can handle this, and they sent, and 36 of them got killed. But it was because they had failed when they went into Jericho. And we had the story of the good bad guy, which was what's her name? You know what I'm talking about? Rahab, the prostitute that helped Joshua's spies get into the city and out of the city. And then you had the good bad guy, who was Achan, the guy that when they took Jericho, he took some of the things that he wanted. He coveted some of the Canaanites' goods, and why not? It was for him, but that cursed them, and 36 people died because he took that thing, and they ended up stoning him in the edge of camp, like God had asked him to do. But in Joshua, you see the conquest of Canaan, and it was pretty much Joshua's whole adult lifetime. Joshua came across, he was probably a child when they came across in Exodus, but he was a man when, at the end of Deuteronomy, when he was charged with leading Israel in the conquest of Canaan. So we have Joshua, be strong and be courageous, and Joshua's lifetime looked awesome. But there were some holes in it, and we see that when we get into Judges. The first and second chapters in Judges tell us about how they hadn't taken all the land they were supposed to in the time of Joshua, or not that Joshua was responsible for it all, but Joshua didn't set up a leader like they were supposed to, and he just kind of figured that. But they had already also divided the land like they weren't supposed to until God ordained them to do it. But they did. Okay, remember the middle half of Joshua is divisions of land and giving parts of and parcels of land to the different tribes, and they gave the tribes their inheritance. But when that happened, you get a clue when the half tribe of Manasseh and the Gad and the eastern tribes go back east, the first thing they did when they got across the Jordan was to build an altar. So the people of Israel would gather together, and they were going to go and destroy them and their altar. And they made an excuse. Well, that altar ends up getting used as a high place to burn people and do things that they were like the other gods. Just like he warned them in Deuteronomy 32. Well, Joshua tried his best to do right, and he wasn't able. He wasn't able to do it. And then we have the time of the judges, and this is where everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And that's kind of where we are today. I think if you really look at history, look at our culture honestly, we have a culture of individuality. I see things this way, and you see things that way. Let my truth be my truth, and your truth be your truth. And we can read the book of Judges and see how that pans out. There's nothing new under the sun. Oh man, we just want what we want, and we don't want other people to tell us what to do. Isn't that life? Isn't that the truth of it all? Judges. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. They failed to follow the laws that Moses had given. You know what? They didn't even start to follow the laws that Moses had given them. Ruth is a quick little story of prodigal repentance. You have this lady and her husband and family that went east, went to Moab, and they went there because there was a famine in Judah, or a famine in Judah, because they were from Bethlehem, and they ended up going to Moab because, or for the same reason that Joseph's brothers went to Egypt, because there was a famine in the land and they went away. Well, they go there, and her husband dies, and her sons die, and then the famine is ended. So she decides to go back, but she tells her daughter-in-laws not to have, or just to go back and find a new husband for yourselves. And Orpha, the one daughter-in-law, says okay, and she goes her way. And then Ruth says no. No, I will stay with you, Naomi. I'll stay with you until, and your God will be my God. And she goes. So they go out back and meet Boaz, and Ruth is actually in the genealogy of Jesus, because she's she's like the grandmother of Jesse, and the great grandmother of David, of King David. So that's incredible, man. It's a real story of prodigal redemption. And that gets us into 1st and 2nd Samuel. 1st and 2nd Samuel is, man, I don't have favorite books. This is my favorite book, the Bible. And we have 1st and 2nd Samuel that starts out with the story of this prophet named Samuel, who's not born yet, but he is born and consecrated to God. His mother, Hannah, comes and prays at the temple for a son, and then God grants her prayer, and she dedicates him to the Lord. So she comes back, and when Samuel is a little boy, when he's weaned from his mother, she brings him to the temple, and dedicates him. So he stays at the temple, and he ends up replacing the priesthood there. He ends up replacing Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas, who were corrupt. And Eli was corrupt because he didn't stop them from being corrupt. What he should have done was whatever it takes to get rid of these this apostasy, which is with his kids. So, and then eventually, he grows up and becomes a great prophet. Samuel is the best of the judges, and he's the first of a new story that's happening in Israel. The first of a redemption. Now, they don't start celebrating Passover and all these things, but they do start some measure of reform. Okay, and we are introduced to David as a young man who is a man after God's own heart. You see him alone as a shepherd of the sheep, and he's growing in wisdom, and he is pretty much ordained. God set David up to be who he was from the very beginning. And David listens to Samuel, and David knows not to go against the king at the time, who was Saul, who started out well but ended up being wicked. And then we have the death of Saul and the rise of David. So David takes the kingship, and we read that again through the book of Kings and again through the book of 1st and 2nd Chronicles, because what happens in Kings is you have the story of David and his lineage, and then you have Solomon who takes over everything, who takes over the kingdom and has a time of peace and is able to usher in a time of great prosperity and wealth for Israel. Israel is the center of the world from this point on, and he's able to build a house for God, and God dwells with him, but he ends up messing up badly in not the same ways that David did, but in much worse ways. He takes wives from different people that God said not to. He obviously didn't follow the counsel that David did. He didn't know God. He wasn't a man after God's own heart like David was. And the story of David and Solomon's fall was pride that led to arrogance, and pride and arrogance leads to failure. When you become too puffed up, when you get too full of yourself, you think, I am wise, I'm the wisest person that ever lived, and nobody could ever be as wise as me. And that happened. I mean, that was a gift. That was a gift for Solomon, but he used it in the wrong way, and he ended up puffing himself up with that pride rather than using it to bless others. And that still happens to people today. 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. 1st Chronicles, like I said, man, those genealogies are a booger to get through. There's 9 chapters of genealogy, and it feels like 10, because after you get done with that, then you have to read about David and his mighty men and his mighty men's names and all that stuff. We read all that through that stuff in Kings, and we read all through that stuff in there. But these genealogies kind of go through everything that we've read before. They summarize this whole story from Genesis all the way to 2nd Kings. And the coolest thing about Chronicles is that it was written after the Babylonian captivity. So we're not even really to it yet. We're not to the point where, we need to get through the prophets before we really consider how great Chronicles is. You have different perspectives. It's not the same story as 1st and 2nd Kings. It's a story from a different perspective, and it gives us details from 1st and 2nd Kings that we didn't get. So with our timeline, let me fix my zoom so you can see this a little better. Oh, there we go. Now you can see that. So here we are at Sinai, and then we have the second fall, and then we have the splitting of the Red Sea, and then we, or no, sorry. And then we have the time of conquest in Canaan, and we see some great things happening, but then it starts to fall off again, and we have the people going and acting like the other nations, and then they wanted a king, and they wanted another king, and they wanted another king. They wanted a king, so the king came and brought things almost back to this level here. Almost back to this level, but it falls short. We fall short in our own duties. Okay, and then you have the reign of Solomon, which almost gets there, man. We're almost there. And then things fall off with Rehoboam, and then the sons, and then the kingdom is split. Man, this is terrible. And it goes right back down to here. Guys, our base level is down here. There's some really cool things I want to keep doing in the reviews. I want to keep doing this timeline thing because there's really something cool I want to show you when we get to the New Testament about how a timeline looks. Well, let me know how you thought about this review. I know I didn't do what I thought I would do with it. I don't think it's as good as it could be, but um, I did want to catch us up through this. So next week on Thursday, I will put out another review that's kind of like this, but give me some feedback so I know what you liked, and ask questions, because it's hard for me to review things and answer questions that I don't know. I'm trying to paint with a wide brush, and I don't know what you don't understand. What are your questions? You can send me questions through on the Facebook page, or you can send them on my YouTube channel, or you can send them to me in Messenger, or if you want to talk to me, you can give me a call. If you contact me in Messenger or whatever, I'll give you my phone number and we can talk about it. Well, brothers and sisters, I've got reading to do. I've got to read tomorrow's stuff. So God loves you. I love you too. God bless you. Amen.